Welcome to the Tiger Interview Series.
In this episode, we have Adam Jahnsen of Ace Baseball Development and Tony Katakis of Elite Sports Medicine. The duo has been responsible for a number of Power 5 commits, and they have personally committed heavily into providing the best service and quality training a pitcher could ever receive. They share their thoughts on where training development is currently, and they give sound advice on how to navigate velocity, strength training, and athletic maintenance. My biggest thought when speaking with them is that pitching information is a vast ocean, and having someone you trust and having your best interest at heart is extremely rare. They are definitely not out to chase a number, but see you dominate in-game and on the field rather than being just a cage hero. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Tiger Interview Series. My name is Spiker Helms. I have two great, fantastic guests. The wonderful Adam Jahnsen. We just did a recording of the closing pitch. If you have already listened to that, this is the new episode with Tony Katakis. First off, I love the last name. Like,
it's very Greek,
but it's just like I love saying it. You are a chiropractor.
Yes.
And just to give you a little bit of backstory, I have done an interview with an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Alexander Aleem. I'm planning on doing another one with a doctor who does PRP and STEM.
Right.
You are my first chiropractor.
Perfect.
And I feel like this is going to be a very fantastic conversation because of your expertise. And also we have a pitching guy. And how I'm viewing this is that he is my liaison for the arm because I'm a hitting guy.
Right.
And I'm on this kick right now where I want to learn as much as I possibly can about pitching because a little bit of backstory with me is that I was a good pitcher in high school, pretty decent, but I literally plateaued on velocity. I went from, I was throwing 81 to 83 as an 8th grader, and then literally that's all she wrote.
Yeah.
That's all I did. So, and then down the road, which is why I love talking to PRP guys in STEM, is that that's what actually saved my career because I had that procedure and I had arm injuries. So I had a forearm issue here where it was the ulnar collateral, which is a nerve, and literally was numbing myself out.
Really?
Yeah. So I'd have like my ring finger and my pinky finger would just go completely numb because that nerve was rolling.
Yeah, that ulnar nerve clicking back and forth.
Yeah. And then I had the ulnar collateral, right? That got torn just a little bit. And then PRP literally saved my career.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Crazy, right? No surgery. Yeah. I'm not like Dave where he has like this huge gash in his arm and named it and everything. So I'm lucky on that, right? So give a little bit of backstory of like who you are, origin story, and then Adam, I want you to jump in for people that have not listened to the closing pitch. Kind of give a little bit of elevator pitch on who you are as well. So Tony, go ahead, give us a little backstory who you are.
All right. So like you said, my name is Tony Katakis, and I am a chiropractor. And along with being a chiropractor, I am also a strength conditioning coach. And so prior to coming to chiropractic school, I had spent some time in the private sector of strength conditioning. While I was in chiro school, I also got my master's degree in sports science and rehabilitation. So I am very much geared toward the sports side of things. That is my specialty. I don't spend a whole lot of time working with geriatrics or little kids. My specialty is sports. And so working with Adam, we've kind of carved out this little baseball niche, which has been awesome. And I also just enjoy working with the athlete in general, because when I grew up, I was an athlete and sports were everything, right? I played football growing up, and that was my main sport. I ended up playing in college, and that was the most important thing for me growing up, was playing football in college. And the reason I'm actually a chiropractor is because when I was in high school, I had this hip injury. And through this process of this terrible nagging hip injury my junior year, right? And everybody knows that junior year is pretty important when it comes to recruiting and all that. Unless you committed as a freshman, which happens, but not for me. I wasn't that good. I was a good athlete in high school, but overall probably pretty mediocre at the advanced level. And so I was just trying to make it. And I couldn't really play at the level I wanted to because of this hip injury.
What was the hip injury?
It was femoral acetabular impingement with some
Holy
labral
crap, that is a
irritation.
whole bunch of words. I have no idea what it means, but I'm fascinated.
Basically, and I could go on and on and on about FAI, but my ball and socket joint of the hip was not getting along very well.
So where would that be at, like near the hip flexor or
underneath? So it's the joint itself, the hip joint as it goes into the pelvis. It's your hip is basically a ball and it inserts into a socket and it kind of moves around and does hip stuff from there. And so there was some pinching and some issues inside the hip, and I had a ton of stuff going on functionally, which I'll get to in a second. But long story short, I went to all these surgeons who saw me for a hip. They didn't really care about the kid who wanted to play football at all costs, who didn't think about anything else beyond this one thing, playing football in college. I was a hip, right? And
were they hip specialists?
Yes. Oh, yes.
They were hip specialists.
They were hip specialists, and they were.
I love how you said, "Oh yeah, they're hip specialists."
That's literally all they did.
So did they just go like straight, like, all right, we need to knife you up?
Exactly.
Really?
And I'm from Detroit ish. And so I went to the best people in Detroit, or even the best people in Michigan. I went to the highest recommended surgeons at the time. And when I was there, like I said, I was looked at as a hip, and they said, you have a hip problem and this is the only thing we can do for your hip problem. And like you said, it's basically, we need to knife you up. We need to open everything up. We need to shave it down. We need to do this whole process. You're going to be out for a whole bunch of months, and you're going to miss your senior year of football. And for me at the time, without any offers, that was everything, because I had a terrible junior season because I was hurt, and no offers. I wanted to play in college. I needed this senior year to go well. And
isn't that the same thing that Bo Jackson dealt with?
I believe so, probably.
It was a hip thing where it was like a freak tackle.
That was I
Bengals.
think he broke it, didn't he?
It was a break.
That's a little bit more traumatic, where mine was more of just like the way that the hip was shaped, and then as I continued to run and play the sport, it started to develop into a problem. And so, like I said, long story short, hip specialists, all of them, told me I was done. I needed this surgery, and I was crushed. You can imagine being that young kid who cares about one thing, who, at this point now, that one thing is taken away from you. I didn't know what to do. So I actually, I accepted my fate, and I was like, you know what, Mom?
You got the surgery.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, because my mother talked me out of it. She was like, oh, I've heard really good things about this chiropractor over here. Why don't we just go try it out? And I was like, no, Mom, you don't know. These are the best surgeons in Michigan. They know what I need. I'm not going to go anywhere else. Why would I? And so I end up going to this chiropractor who's just like a small town local chiropractor, amazing human being. But he was the first person through this whole process to look at me beyond just a hip, right? He looked at other things. He looked at the pelvis. He looked at the core. He looked at ankles. He looked at knees. He looked at everything. And that holistic perspective led me kind of on this path to eventually going to this big training facility in Ann Arbor, or not in Ann Arbor, in Auburn Hills, Michigan, just outside of Detroit. And there I ended up working with a PT who did the same thing, looked at other things outside of just the hip. And we found a ton of stuff. And then next thing you know, I started working with these people and I felt way better. And I ended up going back to a surgeon. He was like, well, since you're not symptomatic right now, we can't really justify the surgery. So one actually recommended I try out, or I go and join the track team and just run until I get hurt. Then he was going to perform the surgery. So I actually joined the track team to try to get hurt so I could have surgery. And which is the dumbest thing ever. But I ended up continuing to work with these guys, never got hurt, worked with these guys throughout the summer, played my senior year of high school football, had a great year, had a ton of fun, ended up getting a athletic academic scholarship to a smaller school, which was perfect for me. I went there. I basically played in college, had a very mediocre college experience, and got it out of my system. And that was when I decided to transfer all this energy I had for football and basically translated into what's next, and in this case, sports medicine, working with athletes, helping athletes with whatever they have going on. And when I see an athlete, seeing them as more than just an elbow or just a shoulder or just a knee or an ankle or a hip, right? And I'm sure we'll get into this at some point, but when I look at athletes, when I work with athletes, I take a very holistic approach. And I look at
it's almost like asking why.
Yes.
Why does that shoulder hurt?
Right.
Why does that knee hurt?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's like Eastern medicine.
Exactly.
Like, so I'm married to an Indian woman, and they are all about like, oh, you don't need medicine. Just do this.
The why.
It's the why.
So if you were to come into my clinic today, I will basically, I'll most likely go through this whole spiel about you have a what diagnosis and you have a why diagnosis. Your elbow injury, like I can get in there, maybe I can order imaging, I can do a cluster of orthopedic tests, and I can tell you with pretty decent confidence what is going on, but it's not the why is this going on. And then the why concept, we could go on and on and on about whether, if we're talking about baseball specifically, is it a movement problem? Is it a form problem? Is it an intensity problem? Is it a volume problem? Is it mobility, stability problem? Is your elbow problem actually a hip problem? And what's not going right to make that hip problem an elbow problem? And we could go on and on and on about that, but
that's why I love what Adam does, because he does the why inside baseball.
Yes.
Like, why do you function that way? Why is it that you throw like that? And try to figure out how to make it a little bit better, more efficient, right? And I think it goes back to, like, you mentioned something where it seems like there's a communication problem between, like, the surgeon, the customer, the PT, the chiro. All these people are not talking to each other.
Right.
And they're just literally saying, and then if I go to a surgeon's going to say, oh, you need surgery.
Right.
Hammer,
nail.
Hammer, nail. I hit nail. You know what I'm saying?
And there are great surgeons out there. Like, don't get me wrong. There are surgeons.
They're very smart, and they are very smart people.
Yes.
And,
but very smart.
It's the ability to ask the right question, to the right person. But here's the issue: is that I only know what I know. So when I go, I just know that I have a hip problem. Right. I need it fixed.
Right.
Who's the smartest person in the room?
Right.
Doctor.
Yeah.
Right.
He's got the DR in front of his name. He's got to be smart, right?
Right.
So I'm very interested on, like, going more down in this route, because, like, you just opened up like a whole can of worms in my head, and it's like, oh my gosh, I want to ask so many questions, but I can only ask it in a sequence order. But before we do that, Adam, go ahead and introduce yourself. Give a little background of who you are and what you do.
My name is Adam Jahnsen. I run Ace Baseball Development here in Chesterfield. Played high school baseball locally. I went to Forest Park Community College. Went to Xavier. Played for the Gateway Grizzlies of the Frontier League, and then I got on to single-A spring training with the Cardinals. At a young age, I was fairly athletic, hardest thrower, threw the most. A two-way guy all the way through high school. So it's very similar to Tony in that, I was a pretty good athlete, threw really hard, didn't necessarily know how to throw or volume, intensity, that kind of stuff. So the reason why I'm in this job is to kind of help kids learn how to move at a young age, try to give them as many resources as I can as far as throwing volume, throwing intensity, and just try to basically educate them on how to get the most out of your body the safest way possible as far as how to move efficiently. So that's kind of why I started ACE.
And for everyone that is listening, that has listened to the closing pitch, we have partnered up with ACE. So indirectly, we have partnered up with Tony. Explain your guys' partnership, because one thing that ACE does that a lot of development programs with group training, right? We talked about this in closing pitch, like, oh, here's a program, go do it. Right. You guys do it in a totally different way, where it's more personalized and everything like that. So explain your partnership and how it works, and why you guys do what you do.
So usually it's the customer who contacts me, email, by phone, and before they join our program, they have to get assessed. Tony performs a movement screen that, and he'll talk about this. It tests all different mobility, flexibility, stability. And they have to go through that process first to get to us because we want to know as much about the client as we can prior to them throwing a baseball with us.
So functional movement screenings, right?
Right, but not the FMS. We are definitely taking them through a screening process, but it's probably more of an assessment than it is just a screen. Like a screen is designed to, pick out who the red flags are maybe. And we do have components of that for sure. But we are also diving into specifics of how you move and how well you move. And it's, as I was saying before, when I said I take a very holistic approach, the ACE baseball assessment is very holistic. We're looking at shoulder mobility, both internal, external, both active and passive, meaning active, how far you can take it back, and then passive, how far when you're relaxed, can I stretch you back? And that right there just tells us a ton of information, especially if whether or not you have pain. And if you have pain, where is it? And on and on. We're looking at scapular stability, and we're also looking at how the scapula moves and when it moves and the quality of how it moves.
What's a scap?
A shoulder blade. So the shoulder blade is basically the anchor of the arm on the trunk, right? And if that anchor is not working well, you're going to get some disconnect. You're going to get things going on in the shoulder, in the elbow possibly, because that anchor is not set right. We're also looking at how well the trunk rotates. And so if your trunk, if your T-spine, your thoracic spine isn't moving or rotating well.
Where's the T-spine at?
That would be basically below your neck and above your low back. So that whole area where your ribs attach to your spine, that's your T-spine, that's your thoracic spine. That's the area of the trunk we want to move and rotate really well. And if that area does not move and rotate really well, your body's going to get that movement from somewhere else. It's going to plow through somewhere else. And
it's an energy. You got to find the energy source and use it.
Yes.
And if that energy source is not there, it's going to find the easiest one.
An elbow, maybe.
Yep.
Or a shoulder. And then next thing you know, we have a what diagnosis walking through the door. My shoulder hurts, my elbow hurts, whatever. Come to find out, mobility, stability in those areas are great. We just have that issue down the chain a little bit. And that's just like another variable that we're looking at. We're looking at the trunk, we're looking at core. So how well does your core and hips stabilize and work together? We're looking at hip mobilities because your hips have to move. That's where you're going to get the majority of your power. And if they don't move, you're robbing yourself. We're also looking at ankles too. So we have this whole process where we're literally measuring with an instrument how well or how far your joints move. We have another process where we're filming you move, and a lot of that's like guys moving with their shirts off, and we're filming their shoulder blade go up and down or whatever. And then we also have a component where we're jumping guys on force plates, and we're getting a ton of data on how they generate power, how well they move, how flexible they are even, how explosive they are, how strong they are relative to their body weight. And then another part that's kind of an unofficial spin off of our assessment is we'll do motion capture too. So we'll use 4D motion, which is a very simple tool where we can measure the speed of rotation through your trunk or your pelvis by just attaching some sensors on you. It's kind of like if you've ever seen like video game designers and you see the guys running around in like the leotard with all the
little dots and everything.
Yeah, all the little dots. Basically, those little dots are what we attach to the athlete, and we have them move, and those send all that information back to a computer or an iPad, and we're able to get a pretty comprehensive breakdown on how well they move, how they rotate, and going, I guess, a little bit deeper into that, when things move. So your pelvis has to rotate before your trunk, which has to rotate before your arm. And if that whip gets, interfered with in any way, if the sequence gets interrupted.
So if there's like a knot in the whip.
Yes, if there's a knot in the whip, that's huge. Like a mobility dysfunction or tightness or lack of flexibility. We're going to lose ability to kind of crack the whip. And then also, like, if you're just not moving the whip in the right direction, or if, like I said, if your trunk's moving before your pelvis or your hips, you're robbing yourself of all the power you just generated from your legs or from your pelvis. So that's something we also try to identify, because if your sequence is off, you're gonna have problems. And if you have major mobility issues, you're gonna have problems because you're gonna have to find mobility somewhere else. Or stability, you're gonna be kind of a loose cannon and maybe plow through some tissues that aren't meant to take it.
Mm-hmm. So, athlete contacts you first. They
Right.
want to be a part of ACE's pitching
Right.
program. Then, before you are able to see them or work with them, you require them to see Tony.
Yes.
Without a doubt.
Absolutely
That was
mandatory.
very
absolutely mandatory.
That was like, I don't care who you are, I'm sending you to Tony.
And that's exactly what it is too, because it also kind of weeds out the pitchers that may not.
Also, that's a liability on
It's
your
a liability,
end too,
right?
Because
Right.
you are promising the customer that we are going to make you an efficient pitcher,
Right,
And if you don't back it up with some type of medicine,
Right.
you're just shooting from the hip.
Well, that's the thing too that we talked about too. Is the last podcast is trying to create a culture, teaching the consumer that it is more than just a pitching lesson or a hitting lesson.
It's educating the consumer.
Educating. So much goes into this.
Yeah.
But again, if you're going to do it right, I mean, that's the process to go through. Because I want to know as much about that person walking through that door as possible before we prescribe them plyo ball drills, throwing drills. And like Tony said, volume, intensity. It's always nice to have, Tony in the facility because, again, it's all about collaboration. Because like you said, there are so many players out there going to the pitching coach here, the trainer here, and to truly collaborate, I think you have to not necessarily like be in the same facility, but it makes all of our jobs so much easier. Because again, it's more than just going to pitching lessons.
Yeah. I'm big on narratives, huge on narratives, and I think that there's a lot of narratives out there in the sports world that are wrong. One example being that softball pitchers don't have arm injuries. That's a huge narrative that is not correct, right?
Right.
Chiropractor. Whenever you hear chiropractor,
I already know. No,
that's why I can't stand calling you.
It's a shame because I feel like if you shut out something, you got to know what it is. Instead of believing like, oh, Susie said that this chiropractor does this and it's not right. Instead of going to the source and like really listening to who you are, right? Mm-hmm. So to people that are listening, don't think that this is voodoo. Like, don't think it's voodoo. Open up right now. I want you to explain what a chiropractor is.
Okay.
And your expertise.
Right. I could probably speak best first, from a profession standpoint, people think that you go to the chiropractor and you get popped and then you're out the door. And people believe that for a reason. They believe that
like popping your neck, popping your back.
Yeah, pop your neck, crack your back, whatever, and then you're out the door. And people believe that because there are so many chiros out there who have kind of sold out to that. So many people have taken the quick, easy way out where, hey, I'm just going to kind of spin you left and right and send you out the door, and I'm going to spend 30 seconds with you. Those people are out there, and yes, those people are probably helping a lot of people, and I'm not here to say that there's anything wrong with how other people practice or whatever, but when you're an athlete, you have a little bit, you're different. You have more requirements. You're a little higher maintenance. You got stuff going on that we have to look at. And when I work with an athlete, I'm trying to look at as much of that stuff that's relevant as possible, right? And so when I'm working with somebody, yes, I use manipulation, which is maybe the what people associate with popping, cracking, whatever. I'll use manipulation in areas that need it. And areas that need to be moved like that are areas that are stiff, areas that are stuck, areas that don't have that prerequisite mobility. And it's just a really good, powerful tool to open up that joint where it's restricted, in addition to talking to the brain and stimulating the brain about that spot that's a little stuck. And so you get a lot of magic that happens when the brain is talking to the area that's stuck. Because
so like when you hear that pop, basically the brain is saying, oh, we need more resources towards that area.
Well, when you hear the pop, that's gas being released from the joint. That's us moving a joint that's stuck in and allowing it to move better.
Got it.
And then when that happens, a ton of information is sent up to the brain about that area because we just stimulated it. The same can be said about, a vibration gun on your forearm or whatever. The brain's going to feel that, and it's going to send a little bit more sensory input to that area. Maybe you'll get some more healing processes to kind of uptake from there. But then, I guess kind of getting back on track, what I do, what a sports chiropractor does is number one, diagnose. If you're going to somebody and they're not diagnosing you, if they're not taking you through an exam, if they're not trying to find out the what in addition to the why, maybe you're in the wrong place. And that is number one. And so we have the power to diagnose, and in this state, and I can speak for what I do and what I can do. If you need an MRI, I can order it. If you need a diagnostic ultrasound or an X-ray, I can order it. If you need blood tests, I can order it. And so step one is diagnose what's going on. Find out where we need to target our mission here, and then go from there. After that,
before we jump in, the word diagnose, so that everyone understands, is that you're sending athletes to Tony, and you diagnose them, correct?
If they have something to be diagnosed with, yeah.
But this is more, I feel like the unlock for me in my athletic career, going to a PT and going to a chiro, Missouri State does a phenomenal job. And I would go to them consistently through the week and just get checkups and just making sure, hey, is everything on track? I kind of view it like a car. Like I'm going to go to a mechanic and make sure I get the oil change. Now, is there anything else wrong with my machine?
Right.
To make sure that I'm not breaking down on the middle of the road. I feel like sports athletes don't treat it that way. They just wait until
something breaks.
And they're on the side of the road.
Without a doubt.
On the side of the road and be like, oh yeah, your rear axle is just totally shot. Right. So you might need a new car.
Right. Exactly.
So go ahead, go back down.
And I think that's a perfect segue into the second part. Like once we find out what's going on, whether it's a mobility issue or a stability issue, like you have an issue controlling a certain area of your body, or you don't have a lot of control over your core or over your pelvis or over your shoulder, then we get into improving those qualities. And there's a ton of tools in the toolbox. I'll use adjusting, manipulation, whatever you want to call it, as one. However, I do a ton of soft tissue. I'll do a ton of scraping, taping, needling, cupping, whatever you need for that area. Whether it's a trigger point, we have a certain set of tools we'll use. If it's just a tight, sore muscle, we'll have a certain set of tools that we'll use for that. And then we kind of go from there based on what you need and where you're at. And so really, if you are an injured athlete, you're coming through and you're getting diagnosed, and we're finding out what's going on and what you need, and we're going after that thing with whatever tools are required for that job. But you can also come through the funnel as an athlete who's not injured, who wants to perform better, who wants to move better. And I would say maybe 25% of the people that walk through my door every single day fall into that category. They just want to move better. They want to perform better. And if you're a baseball player, there's a ton of stuff we can do to help you move better and perform better. And going back to some of the things I mentioned before, that is the mobility where you're stuck, where you have terrible mobility, where you need mobility in places like your shoulder, in places like your trunk, in places like your hips. If you don't move well through there, we can find, is it a joint issue? And if it's a joint issue, do we need to move the joint around, help the joint be a better joint and move better? Or is it a soft tissue issue? And do we need to kind of maybe push around or lengthen or decompress or dry needle or whatever that tissue to help it be better at being soft tissue, at stabilizing, at stretching, at snapping back? And so if you need that from a performance perspective and we unlock some of those things, you're going to be able to get into your body a little bit more. You're going to, like you said, it's almost like changing the oil and rotating the tires and making sure that everything's aligned, the axle's all good, and we can kind of go on this road trip, which is maybe a high school season.
How do you see like the different professions? I know I don't want you to cross a line that you shouldn't be crossing, but like, how do you view the chiropractor, the ortho, the PT guy or girl, how do you view those different disciplines so that an athlete has a better idea of like, okay, this is the person I need to go to?
How to use them, right?
Yeah, how to use them.
Yeah. So
Because like I'm not gonna put a shortstop behind the dish.
yeah,
Right.
Like they like an indie ball. They tried to put me behind the plate. And I go
Like
back
Jose
there
Oquendo.
I go back there for a bullpen. He's like, Spike, you can do this. Go back there. Let's see how you look. 94 mile an hour fastball right off the chest. Don't let a shortstop go behind the dish. All right, go ahead.
So
Slider.
I this is a great question because I think this does get kind of confusing, and what I do tends to cross over sometimes, but I would argue that it crosses over in a good way because, well, let's just take, for example, if you have a really bad traumatic injury. Let's say you're on the mound, you're throwing at 100% intensity, and you feel this pop and your elbow hurts and you couldn't possibly throw another ball. Well, yeah, obviously you're going to go to the dugout. You're going to, probably get kind of angry, feel sorry for yourself, whatever, but you have to do something. You have to get this thing checked out. If it's that kind of injury where you can't throw again, you know something's wrong. Know that something's not right. You know that it's probably pretty serious.
Like literally when you pick up a ball, like you literally drop it.
Yeah, you should go straight to the orthopedic surgeon who is the guy in the area. And that doesn't mean that person's just going to do surgery. I probably had just a bad experience. Everybody's different. And I can say that the orthopedic surgeons here in St. Louis, the ones I've worked with, the ones that I've sent people to are great. Never once have I been in a situation where I was like, they suggested surgery. I think I just had a bad experience, and I hate to kind of throw shade at them.
My experience is pretty similar to yours. Like literally the guy's like, all right, let's cut you up. I'm like, what?
Right.
I just literally stepped into this office.
Right.
He's like, no, I've seen this plenty of times. We need to cut you up. Actually, I have the tools right here. Mom, sign the papers.
Do it now.
Right. Well, I think yes, you got that bad injury. Go to that person who's most likely going to address it first. What they're going to do is they're going to order imaging, and then they're most likely going to schedule your date if you need surgery, if something's torn. And a lot of good orthos work with a lot of really good PTs too. And so you got injured, maybe you need surgery. They're going to schedule the surgery. That's where you need to be. And then after that, say you go and have surgery. Well, then you're going to get sent to PT, and post-surgical, like that is where 100% where you should be. You shouldn't be anywhere else but the physical therapist. I've worked with guys who are post-surgical, but not right after. And if I am working with them, it's it's together with another PT. It's with somebody who's doing the primary work of getting the range of motion back or whatever they need for the specific case. But let's kind of look at the other end of the equation. Say you're on that same mound, you throw that same pitch, and it's not an explosive injury where you're like, oh my God, it's over. Mm-hmm. Say you have a little tweak. You don't need to run for the hills right now. Maybe it's something very minor. Maybe it's nothing at all. Maybe it's just a little soreness. That's the time where you can come straight to somebody like a sports chiropractor. I don't want to say everybody go out to your local chiropractor, because this person, in order to be well equipped to help you right now, needs to have that sports specialty, right? Like you need
acumen.
Yeah, you can't just go to your everyday strip mall chiro who just, cracks people left and right for neck pain or back pain.
So don't go to like a franchise chiropractor and be like, all right,
probably not.
This is what happened.
Probably not. And I would like say you're not from St. Louis or whatever, and you're looking for, who to go to. Find the baseball guys, find the sports guys, find the trainers, because
they're pretty locked in. Yeah.
They're in touch with the people they need to be in touch with, and then their referral network is going to be a lot better than you going to Google and finding out where to go.
Yeah, because there's only a certain amount of PTs that I trust.
Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of good ones here in St. Louis, and I think even like what I do with athletes can be somewhat interchangeable with what some of those people who I really respect and trust here in town do. And I would have no problem if someone says like, oh, hey, I'm going to go down the street and work with this guy. I'm like, okay, cool. Call me if you need me. But if they're, in some random place that doesn't exactly do what they need, well, then I'll maybe talk to them and maybe point them in the direction of that other guy, or maybe I'll offer what I do or whatever. But from a just general movement or performance perspective, there are a few people that can do this job. That's what I really specialize in. That's what I do. And there are other chiros here in town that do it. And so it doesn't just have to be from an injury, but like I said, say you're not full blown, everything's gone, you need surgery now. We can then give you what's called a trial of care, meaning we're just going to treat you for maybe a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, and see what happens. If you don't get better, then we're going to send you over to the ortho, who's going to maybe want to take a little bit of a deeper dive with an MRI or something like that. But if you do get better, then good news. You can go out and do your thing. Go ahead and play. I guess also from another, going back to the injury that's severe, say you can't get into the ortho for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Well, then you can come to me. I'll do the same exact cluster of orthopedic tests and take you through the same exact exam that your ortho will. And I can order the MRI right now, so you have it when you do get that appointment, so that your transition from that appointment to whatever you need after that is a little bit quicker. That's another case where you could utilize somebody like me. If you're in St. Louis, I've done it with a ton of guys here in town where they have their MRI ready to go. They go to the ortho, and the ortho's like, yep, that's what you need. And then they go ahead and have done whatever they need to have done.
So the people in an athlete's corner, I've named all of them, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
There's no other profession that I'm missing?
No, yeah.
Physical therapist.
Physical therapy, chiro, ortho. Okay. And you, like I said, if you have a really good PT, you could probably get some of the benefits of having a really good chiro. There's so much overlap between the two.
That's what I want to get down is like, what's the difference between a physical therapist and a sports chiropractor?
Mm-hmm. Well, for me specifically, what I do not do, what I do not touch is somebody post-surgical. Like if you just had an ACL surgery, you're going to spend a lot of time with a PT for a while before we do anything.
Would this be a fair assessment, like a fair analogy here, is that you're kind of like the car mechanic that can do the oil change and figure out what's going on wrong. Mm-hmm. Your collision repair guy is your ortho.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And then your PT guy is like, all right, we can repaint the objects on the car.
Wait, and they work really well with the collision repair shop. So I would even argue that their PTs would work really well in that collision repair shop, where I can almost be your wellness guy, where you're coming in and getting your oil changes and your rotations and your checkups and that kind of thing. And certainly, like, yes, if you have a real injury, that doesn't require surgery. There's a ton of stuff we could do, whether it's rehab, whether it's soft tissue, whether it's joint stuff, whatever it is. There's a whole big bag of tricks that we could kind of throw at it to help whatever you got going on.
Gotcha.
And I think also you were talking about people in your corner. I think the biggest...
You wouldn't call them tricks, would you? Do you call them tools?
Yeah, yes, tools.
Because I don't want someone to be like, I knew it, it's voodoo. The cat's out of the bag.
And I think if you're working with a sports person, they're most likely fairly evidence-based, and whatever they're doing is going to be backed up by research or literature or whatever.
They're going to have a strong point on the fact, like, hey, this is why it's happening.
Right. Okay. And there is one thing I also do want to touch base on. You talked about people in your corner. And this is something I've told Adam a million times. In a lot of cases, Adam is a better clinician than I am, because say that same person with the elbow problem came into my office and it's not full blown, maybe it's a little tweak, and they see me and I'm doing all this stuff, and yeah, maybe we're getting some improvement. If I send them to Adam, and Adam looks at them and identifies what they don't do well from a pitching or throwing mechanics perspective, 9 out of 10 times, if they fix that little flaw in their movement, they're fine. And Adam's the one to identify that.
Makes
the
a lot of
pitching
sense.
coach is the one to see it, identify it, fix it. Then we're taking the fuel off the fire. We're taking the gas off the fire with whatever they're doing incorrect. And then from there, whatever I do is more effective too. So I think like a really good pitching coach who understands mechanics and safe mechanics and identifying bad ones is a better doctor than your ortho, your PT, your chiro, or whoever.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that's why, I mean, us as like pitching coaches too, I think every time we get around March, parents and kids are like, okay, here's the spiel about in-season work. The fact of the matter is, we don't see a lot of these kids in the spring and the summer because they're out playing. So if they can come in once a week, twice a week for their maintenance stuff, because it is very, very common for an adolescent pitcher to get out of whack pretty quickly, whether it's a volume, intensity thing. It's just a normal thing for a younger pitcher to kind of get out of whack. And if they can come in once or twice a week during the season, while they're also strength training is a big thing too, they have a much greater chance of success.
How do you think about peak performance?
Peak performance.
Like, so performing at the peak, like, do you have your players consult with Tony as you're trying to get them to
without a doubt,
that peak performance?
Our guys reassess to make sure everything's clicking on all cylinders.
So you do assessment in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do an assessment
Yes.
in the middle?
Yes, we also reassess, which after they're assessed, Tony prescribes correctives for them, which they do with us as part of their pre-throwing routine.
Okay.
Tony also has them do it back home at the same time. For a lack of a better term, I think once they outgrow those correctives, they may need more advanced correctives, or something changes in their body, he may prescribe something different. Is that right, kind of?
Yeah, so we have progressions and regressions to everything. When we identify whatever you got going on in the beginning, we'll prescribe a 6-week program for that thing. And every week you get slight tweaks in the program and it gets harder, or the exercises change or whatever. And it's very specific or tailored toward what you got going on. We kind of put you in a bucket, whether it's a shoulder mobility problem, or a trunk mobility, or core stability, or hip mobility, or whatever it is. We put you in that bucket, and then we take you kind of along a continuum of let's advocate for the basic movements first. Let's get you that foundational stability or mobility, whatever you need first. And let's do it consistently. Let's try to get it done every day. And then part of the program I send them is on an app that tracks adherence. And so there have been guys that have gone through it. We don't see much change. And then I look at the app and they haven't logged in at all, ever. Not once. Or,
so you have to trust.
Well, that's why compliance is such a big.
And you can hold them accountable.
So like, what are they plugging into this app?
Basically, it just tells me if they accessed it. So when they download the program, it downloads this little app that's very simple. And then they can even set reminders for themselves to do it and all that. And then
what are they logging in? Are they logging in?
They don't. They just have to press like complete.
Okay.
They could sit there and lie to me and just press complete. However, I think most of the guys that go out of their way and we see really good adherence, those aren't the kids that are just logging on and pressing complete, because you see the results in the next assessment. You see what's gone well and what hasn't. Also, I think going along the reassessment train here, we've had guys that have gotten assessed, looked great this time, or not, a little bit before this time last year, right before COVID hit. We had guys coming off of their off-season program and have spent a ton of time working on their bodies and their mobility, stability, strength, all that stuff. And we had that pre-season assessment and they looked amazing. And then they were gone. And then they were quarantining, and maybe they just sat around and did nothing. And then we reassessed them when we all kind of got back together, and wow, like they went down hard. They lost a ton of mobility. They lost a ton of stability.
Because they're not doing anything.
They weren't doing anything. And
this goes back to that lifestyle quote. Like you and Fitz, it's a lifestyle. Right. Like you just not doing anything. Yeah, like you're kind of you're healing, but at the same time, like you're actually getting more stiff.
Right. You can't just be like, oh well, I scored this, therefore I am that all the time.
Yeah.
It's very much a process that you have to kind of nurture and play with and continue to feed. And if you don't, then you can regress. And so part of the assessment process, or the reassessment process rather, is making sure people aren't regressing, and that they are seeing results. And if they're not seeing results, why are they not seeing results? And it's all about gaining the foundational baseline movement competency first, the basic mobility that they need, the basic stability that they need. Because if they don't have that, they don't have much business throwing 90 yet or a ton of volume yet, right?
And that's the hard thing too, is like you can't tell a kid not to throw full speed. He also has a season he has to play. But, we will have kids who walk into their seasons, and I know there's a very good chance of either a lack of performance or injury. Because for a fact they're probably not doing exactly what they need to do.
You're trying to domesticate the stallion.
Right.
It's tough.
Exactly. It is.
You want them to run full speed. You want to see that full throttle.
Right.
Going from like 5'11" to 6'4", does that scare you?
Oh,
without a doubt.
We see it all the time. The kid that grows 8 inches in 8 weeks.
Growth plates and all that good stuff.
We were talking about that last podcast where one of his players hit 90, and he was actually concerned.
I called his father,
and we were talking about if you're a parent that it's like, yeah, 90. Let's take this thing on tour. Let's go visit all these different cities. Let's go to showcases. Let's throw you out there. Let's see what happens, right? And he was like, I have to have conversations with my clients like when that happens, because yeah, you throw 90, but then like what's the downfall of that if you go too hard too early?
Right.
Which goes back to domesticating stallions and trying to convince baby giraffes that they're still a baby giraffe. They're not a full giraffe.
And this
yet.
kid is a baby giraffe, and that's actually his nickname. But so yeah, when those guys gain velocity, it brings me joy, but it also scares the hell out of me at the same time, because you have to do everything correct, and the everything is basically not throwing a baseball. It's off the field. It's the stuff that nobody wants to do. It's not fun. It's boring. It's meticulous. But those guys have to be extra cautious because, again, it's a NASCAR engine inside of a Prius. It's
a really good analogy.
I mean, but if you're a NASCAR, you also need more maintenance. You need more pit stops. You need to,
Formula One engine. Let's
Prius
go.
just kind of keeps going, and it's not real sexy, and it's going to stay at a certain speed. But, NASCAR engine inside of a Prius scares me every day.
So then how would you deal with that if you have a guy that shoots up like 4 inches, 5 inches in a matter of a week or but you know what I'm saying.
Like a year, you see a complete transformation in somebody's body.
We have one of those players in our program. He bought his uniform last year. He's a freshman, and he was like 5'8", I think, and now he's like 6'1". So now we have to buy him a new uniform.
Oof. Yeah. Those people, first of all, sometimes they are liabilities, and sometimes they're not. And most often they are, but
liabilities meaning
they anything could happen at any time. They don't high risk. They don't move all that well, and that they really need to focus on moving well before they pack on a ton of intensity, before they pack on a ton of force through the elbow or the shoulder or whatever.
So that's where strength and performance comes into play.
Yes, super
visiting
important.
You and seeing like, okay, this is what I recommend on how to do certain things.
Right. I think when I get those baby giraffes, part of me knows that I have my work cut out for me, but another part of me is also very encouraged, because you get somebody who's so young, who has all this real estate, that new real estate in their body, for lack of a better term, that they haven't really developed yet. They haven't really mastered it all yet. And so part of what I would do with that person is help them master that new land and help them map that out a little bit. And most often we're talking in terms of stability and maybe teaching them how to use their core a little bit better, or teaching them how to use their shoulder blade a little bit better. So that
explain stability, because I know what it means. He knows what it means, but like I'll say that in a lesson, and then the kid's like, I don't know what that means, but I'll just nod my head. Yes, that sounds real good.
Right. So basically our ability to control, and there are parts of our body that are made to be controlled and stable, and there are other parts of our body that are meant to be mobile and move really well.
Okay.
And so if you were to maybe even just look at your finger, your pointer finger bends in one way, kind of back and forth really, really well. But if you try to rotate that finger, it doesn't like that all that much. It can, but it doesn't like it. Same thing as like the elbow. The finger is just like the elbow. It's like a hinge, kind of just rocks back and forth. It can rotate a little bit, but it doesn't love to rotate all that much. If you go to your shoulder's a ball and socket joint. Ball and sockets love movement. They need mobility. They need to be able to move really well. And so in this case, we would talk about the elbow, the one that just hinges back and forth. We would call that stable because it doesn't need to move all that well. It needs to be strong. It needs to be controlled. And then the shoulder, yes, it needs some control, but it needs to also move really well. And if it doesn't move really well, it's going to get that movement probably from its closest neighbor down the line and get it from the elbow. And we could go on and on. The shoulder blade is supposed to be nice and tight to the rib cage, and we would call the shoulder blade complex a stable joint. And then the next neighbor over, the mid back, the T-spine, like I was talking about, that is supposed to move really well. That's where we're supposed to get all our rotation and extension from. So if you're a pitcher, if you're a hitter, you want to get a lot of rotation from that area. And if you don't get it, maybe you're not getting through, or maybe you're not stretching that rubber band back as far as you could, and you're not getting as much of that recoil or snap back. And so that's a problem.
It's crazy what you can do when your body's able to move efficiently. And that's what I'm getting from this conversation.
And it could protect you too. Like
Yeah.
if it moves efficiently, you're going to protect yourself. And so those baby giraffes just need movement efficiency. I'm very much an advocate for movement quality, movement efficiency. And once we get that, you're probably most likely, if you're in this situation, you're most likely working with the pitching coach. You're most likely have like a strength conditioning coach or a trainer, and you're working with those people. But when you're with me, we're hyper focusing on those little details. And then when you go to this or that, the details are there, but it's not front of mind. Now you can work on strength and performance over here and movement quality pitching over here. And I think going back to what you said before, Adam, that relationship, being able to talk to those people is everything.
You just got to educate the consumer. Like at that age, I don't think I knew what being a chiropractor meant. Like I'd go to one, and then finally when I got to Missouri State, they actually explained it because one, they were teachers, and also they have interns, and then they help the baseball team. So obviously when you're teaching somebody consistently, it just kind of goes down the chain, and then you get to the customer, and then they start learning it, which I was the customer, and I started learning, oh, that's what you guys do. That's really interesting. I'm going to start visiting you guys more often. You seem like really good people, right?
Right.
Where before it was like, my mom would be like, all right, we're going to go see the chiropractor. I was like, oh, man, like really? Like that's like 45 minutes out of my day, and then we're going to have to go there, and then like she's going to do all this stuff. Like I just want to go play, right? Mm-hmm. Is chiropractor Eastern medicine or is it Western?
I mean, the way I practice is definitely, I guess you could consider more Western. It was developed way back in the day. It was more so developed with the philosophy that, you know, you were kind of healing from the inside out. And not to say that some of that doesn't take place. It's just not the emphasis that maybe a sports chiropractor, or me specifically, that's not the emphasis that I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on
how can I make you efficient?
How can I make you efficient? How can I get this car to run a little bit better? You know, how can I get this car to maybe resolve whatever issue it's got going on? And, you know, I'm very much taking a performance lens because I work with athletes. There are a ton of other people here in town who don't work with athletes. They work with people who have real bad back problems or neck problems or shoulder problems. And everybody kind of has their niche, but for me, it's athletes getting efficiency, as much efficiency out of an athlete as possible. And if you're working with a sports chiropractor who works with a coach, whether it's strength conditioning or whether it's a performance or skill coach, that person most likely is bringing all those pieces together. But the problem is when everybody's in their separate silo and nobody's talking, you know, then you might get some of that disconnect.
Before we jump into this topic, I really want to iterate to the listeners. We love velocity. Velocity's fun. It is extremely, I love seeing it when a guy can just huck and chuck at 100 miles an hour, and it's like, wow, that's pretty cool. I also like guys that are able to hit corners and finesse the game and be able to carve out a lineup of 9 guys and they can't figure out how to hit them. Velocity and speed and quickness. How do you view that? I want both of your takes on this. I think it'd be very interesting. How do you view those 3 things? Because that's what everyone wants. They want velocity, they want speed, they want quickness, and then obviously as a hitter, I want power.
Right. I mean, so again, the word of velocity can bring me joy, but can also scare me at the same time. I think the biggest issue these days is I want it now. I want it yesterday, but also velocity and speed at all cost. I am an advocate that the best way to go about it is you slow cook it. Now, kids could gain velocity by improvement in movement patterns. They can gain velocity eating better, sleeping better, strength training. I think it's the guys that prioritize that so much that they skip steps. They take shortcuts. If you want to do it right, it is very, very time consuming. I realize, many people, might not have the time, but like we talked about before,
it's like cooking an egg. Like if I put
yeah.
the burner on 10,
right.
like it's going to cook it, but it's going to be burnt.
Exactly. So there is some patience that goes into it. However, I mean, not a lot of consumers have a lot of patience these days, but if you want to do it the right way, you want to slow cook it. You want to make sure that, again, if you have the big engine, you have to take care of it. And it's not just, again, it's not just pitching lessons. It's not just throwing. You've got to cover all your bases.
Tony?
Everybody looks at the radar gun, and I think, that's the main metric, and that's sexy, right? But the one thing, or rather the things that I look at when I view speed and velocity are ratios of how fast you're moving through your pelvis and how fast you're moving through your trunk. Now, I use that motion capture system that I alluded to before. And those little sensors, those little dots that I put on my...
Pelvis being your hips?
Yep, your pelvis. So I put a sensor on your hips, and I put a sensor on your chest.
So trunk is going to be
chest. It's going to be right on your chest. Basically, it sits on like a backpack. It's like a harness that you put on with a little mini computer sensor.
Catapult? Are you using Catapult?
It's called 4D motion. And so I have a buddy that works in pro baseball, and he works in the sports science department, and he basically walked me through how their pro, sport baseball side of things, how they use these sensors to, monitor their guys. And so the two main metrics that I'm looking at are how well your hips, how fast your hips are moving, and how fast your trunk is moving. And I also look at the ratio between the two, because one's supposed to move a whole lot faster than the other. And if we see that they're equal speed, well, then that's probably a problem. We can also see when goes versus the other. So is it more of a whip, or is it just a swinging gait where everything's just inefficiently just sliding down? And so when I see speed, velocity, all that, yes, I care about how your arm's moving or how fast the ball's coming out. Yes, I care about pull downs and bullpens and all that. But really what I care most about is how fast, and how can we rather maybe study how fast your chest and hips are moving when you do throw your best pitch versus your worst pitch. How do your chest and hips move when you throw your worst pitch?
That's such good information.
Is it slow?
How good of a pitch are you throwing? And then how bad of a pitch have you thrown? And also like intensity situations. Like when your adrenaline's pumping, guy on second, guy on third, seventh inning, pitchers are totally different.
Oh yeah.
And it goes back to that bash ball versus the pressure baseball. Like baseball's completely changed now. The game is not played how it used to be, where like we mentioned, you're not getting in those tight spots. Pitchers are rarely in those tight spots in this season. Maybe once a game, where back in the 2000s, you were getting more pressure type situations. And obviously there's probably someone that's listening like, oh, back in the 80s, we had better baseball, right? It's very important to understand, like from an injury prevention standpoint, what do you like when you have all the intensity on the world on you, and then also your best pitch versus your worst pitch? That's so important.
When all the boys are watching you, like in Ace's case, like all the boys are watching you. They know you got your 100% bullpen today, and you're the guy who throws 90 whatever.
Oh yeah,
everybody is watching.
Oh, I've seen the videos. It's pretty intense.
It's not just them; it's also the guys in the weight room. It's funny. Like you could just be walking through, and you're like, wait, something's not right. You see all these kids in the weight room just like peeking over. Nobody's talking. And then I'm like, oh, wait, so-and-so's throwing a bullpen today. And like you see the numbers pop up on the radar, but that would be a great time to study. How do you move in that type of situation? Or, how do you move in general? And if your ratios are off, if your pelvis and trunk are moving at the same speed, then that's a problem. Or if one's freakishly fast and the other one's slow, well, then we know that also part of what we do together is going to be working on getting that other part that's really slow moving better. And maybe, again, going back to the foundation, is it a movement efficiency problem? Is it just a strength and explosive problem? We'll find out. And that's another reason why it's so important to work with maybe the strength conditioning coach, because I know right then and there, this person maybe needs to throw a couple med balls against the wall and work on that rotational velocity of the trunk or whatever. That is the thing that they need that would probably help them kick over the little plateau that they've been at, because it's not necessarily their form. They got that dialed in and that looks great. It's not their hips. Maybe it's just their ability to rotate through the trunk at a good speed. And maybe if you select these exercises and do this for 6 weeks, we'll see a change. And then the beauty of it is we can monitor it. We can see, are we actually making a change? And if we are, keep going. And if not, continue to switch it up until we do.
You know what's tough is, like, I'm thinking back to my career, is like the efficiency game and being efficient and consistent is very frustrating because you don't see the result and you have to wait and you're like, okay, is this going to look good the next day? Because we used to do FMS, functional movement screening, right? That's the name of it.
Yeah.
At Missouri State, we used to call it fucking Mitch's because we hated it. And again, the head trainer was called Mitch. I love Mitch. If you're listening to this, I doubt you're listening to this, but I love you. You know I love you. But yeah, we call it fucking Mitch.
So I have something too about the radar gun too that we use in practice. We also like to use the radar gun where they can't visually see the number on the board. So we'll basically stand behind them with the radar gun, and you're basically trying to teach them how to throw hard easy. Whereas like, you'll see a lot of kids who are max effort throwers. Again, those are probably your like higher risk guys. But at the same time, like, I mean, if Johnny's throwing 100% and it's real stiff, it's real max effort, we have the gun on him, which we foul that away. Okay, he threw this hard. And then we kind of talk about, not so much while they're on the mound throwing full speed, but how that energy transfers up the kinetic chain. It's that throw hard easy mentality. Whereas you get the gun on the next pitch, they think it's probably 80%, 85%, but they threw that one harder because everything was clicking on all cylinders.
That's how it is with hitting.
That's the best.
Hitting's the same way.
That's my favorite thing with the gun is like not necessarily, we're not chasing velocity. We're trying to understand that maybe if we move more efficiently, we'll get more out of it.
Yeah.
Because those max effort guys scare the hell out of me. The guys that muscle it, they're stiff, and those are the guys that, they're definitely bullpen arms, number one. Like, you're not going to start a guy like that because he's going to probably break down. But trying to teach these guys movement quality, movement efficiency, which can get them better results.
Yeah. That's in hitting the big, I think it's dying down. I don't know. Just another year we'll see. But exit velocity was a huge thing.
Right.
Like it still is, but like hitting exit velocity off a tee doesn't mean anything. Like you still have another factor that you're not considering, which is you have a guy 60'6" that's throwing something at you. What's your exit velocity off of that guy, right?
Exactly.
Because that's not a controllable. You don't control that exit velocity. You kind of do, but you don't.
Right.
The thing that you control is barrel speed, and also how you're approaching it, what's your attack angle, what's your on plane efficiency. All those factors are super important metrics in hitting.
Right.
And I always go back to this as like, would you rather have the fastest exit velo, or would you rather have the longest ball hit? And always the hitter comes back and says, well, I'd rather have it hit farther. I was like, so would you care if your exit velo was 90? No, because it's gone.
Right.
Exactly.
That's exactly.
Yeah, you hit the ball 115 miles per hour, but it was a ground ball to the shortstop. Let's get something straight. At Major League Baseball, that's caught, and you're out.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah.
We always make that joke that, like, if they PR in velocity, but it's out of the strike zone, does it really count? They say, of course, yeah. I mean, send me the video. You know what I mean? But
it's not black or white, though. There's a lot of gray, and it
depends.
Yeah, it depends. Like, Do you want exit velocity? Yes. Do you want throwing velocity? Yes. But are you locating and are you hitting the ball farther?
Well, that's why I take offense to people calling ACE a velocity program. Like they mean it in a very positive way.
So you got mad at me last podcast.
I did get mad at you. I was about to walk out, and I was
this podcast.
Take my ball and go home.
Tony,
exactly.
Tony, we're not doing this podcast.
No, it's just I just know what it means to so many people. It's inaccurate. It almost like cheapens it. So I get it. Like, we want to help players create velocity without focusing just on velocity. It's the process. It's how to get there. It's everything.
It's everything.
You know what I mean?
It's a holistic approach.
Right.
And I think that's what you said in the beginning of the podcast. Being a chiropractor is a holistic approach. I got to know the why before I can actually say, hey, yeah, you do need surgery, or hey, we need to look at something a little bit differently on this problem.
Right.
So, injury prevention versus making gains. What's more important?
Because I'm somewhat.
Because we had sorry to interrupt, but we had a strength and conditioning coach in here, and I didn't get to ask him the question, and he kept on saying injury prevention. I've heard that all my career. So I want to leave it to you on this. Like, what do you think is more important, or is there, we can't level it by importance? They're both the same. Like, how do you view it?
I'm a little biased, obviously, because I work with injuries all day, every day. And I know that if you are injured, you can't necessarily go out and do the thing that you want to do. And we want to avoid injuries at all costs. Not every injury is created equally. Of course, some are more severe than others. And some may come at a cost of training really, really hard. And that's something that I have to deal with people all the time. However, I'm still that advocate for good foundational movement, being able to move well in the ways that you're supposed to move. So making sure you have the prerequisite mobility and stability where you need it. And then once we get that foundation down, then you need to hammer away and try to get all the gains that you can from there. But
I guess it goes like hand in hand, right? Like,
it has to. And it's
like
almost
it's more like would you say like an 80-20 split or a 60-40 split?
It depends. It always depends. It depends. So I think really, like, as long as, say you're not injured and there's nothing wrong with you, as long as you're taking the time to address the movement stuff that you need to address, the stability stuff that you need to address, and continue to do your thing, you're not going to have any problems, and you should go for it. Give it everything you got and try to get all the gains you possibly can. But if you're having issues, like, there's no reason to continue to throttle yourself into nothing and have serious breakdown. That might be the time to maybe dial it back and focus on the prevention side of things if you are that guy. So it depends. It depends kind of what you're feeling, where you're at, what your main issues are. At the end of the day, I think everybody needs to have a certain level of movement competency, a certain level of movement efficiency, and then from there, the sky's the limit.
What's your recommendation on this? Because again, people are probably listening like, man, this is freaking great. I love the information that I'm getting. But like, how do I apply it to my kid? Or if I'm a player listening to this, like, I get it. So should I just go call up the next chiropractor I see? Like, go on Google and type in chiropractor and then call that person up?
Yeah, I
that's the tough part. Like I said, is there any practical things that they can work on or anything like that you can recommend?
I think if you don't have any injuries or issues or anything, I think the best place to be is the trainer, number one. Like, you go to find a good trainer. Don't just go to, your mom's best friend.
You're talking about strength and conditioning?
Strength conditioning, yeah.
Okay.
Go to a good trainer who knows what they're doing. And that could be a skills guy. It could be just a regular strength conditioning guy. Because going back to what we said before, you guys are the ones with the networks. You guys are the ones that know people. You guys are the ones that people like me want to know. Mm-hmm. And if I am a baseball guy or if I'm a sports guy, you better believe that I know who you are, and I'm trying everything I can to get you to know who I am. So I would really start with your trainers, your coaches, and see who they recommend. But then also do your homework. And if you're just getting sent to somebody's best friend because they're their best friend, maybe continue to explore. However, if you do your homework and you see that this person specializes in sports, or they do look at the big picture, then go there. Some specific certifications and stuff that might help steer you in the right direction. There's a certification called On Base U, and there's another one called SFMA. It's kind of the assessment version of the FMS. That's one that it's also through Functional Movement Systems. Some other providers you might look into are like FRA or FRC instructors or providers. And then I use a lot of DNS too. So there's maybe an online directory where people use DNS, which is short for Dynamic Neuromuscular Stabilization. Those are all people that you might, like, if you were to search those things, you might find somebody in your town that would be pretty good. But the first thing above all else is find a good trainer, find a good coach who has a good network, and start there, because they're going to be able to help you in your big town or small town or wherever you're from. And maybe it's slim pickings where you're from. Then you got to kind of work with whoever you can, or maybe you have to drive a little bit, but start with the coaches, start with the travel coaches or whoever you're working with, and they should help.
That makes a lot of sense. I didn't get this question in during the velocity side, but is there a point where the arm breaks and you can't throw as much? Like what's the number that arms can go to? Like right now it's 103.
Oh, I would love
to hit 106, didn't they?
I would love to know that answer.
I don't think it keeps going up. I mean,
it depends. It depends on your hardware. It depends on, your movement or your like joint pliability or your soft tissue pliability. It depends on your movement efficiency. In a perfect world, who knows? But it depends. You're going to have a lot of things that are maybe holding you back from getting there. And if you can work through all that stuff first, that it's an interesting thought experiment or
Well, I thought
see.
like 100, you can only hit that a couple times in a season. Now, like, it's just being blown open every single time. Like, it seems every
4-minute mile.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, 100 is like common now in Major League Baseball. It seems like every team has a guy.
Right.
Before it was just Chapman,
right?
The Cuban Missile. And I remember watching him for the first time. He came to Busch when he was with the Reds, and I was like, oh my gosh, we get to see Chapman. And the ball coming out of his hand was just
special.
Electric.
Right.
It was electric. And now it's like, I watched him with the Yankees, like, oh yeah, there's that guy again.
There's that. Yeah, he's just one of.
It wasn't like Cuban
many.
Missile where you're like, dude, that guy, I love watching him throw. Now it's just like, man, I'd rather see Reyes throw. I'd rather see this guy throw, like DeGrom. Like, I love seeing him throw.
Right.
It's very interesting.
Right.
So, guys, I really appreciate this conversation.
This is awesome.
I know we didn't
yeah.
really go through the sequencing of these questions, but I felt like it was very valuable. I learned a lot, obviously, but I appreciate you guys sharing your knowledge and all of that. Tony, go ahead and give them, like, how can they reach you? What's the best way if they do have a question or would like some advice or some consulting or anything like that? Go ahead and shoot your information.
The best way to get a hold of me is actually on Instagram. So
slide into your DMs.
Slide into my DMs. My name on Instagram is Dr. Tony Katakis. So my name is spelled TonyKatakis. If you're listening to this, it's right there. And then go ahead and send me a message. I try to post some content that might be helpful for athletes on there. And that's the platform I use the most. And so if you have one of those, send me a message. And if not, you could probably look me up on Google and find my website. And there you'll have email address, phone number, all that. So Instagram first, and then my website is elitesportsmed.net. So you could find all that information there as well.
And St. Louis Tigers, if you are part of the high school program, more than likely you will see him very shortly in the fall. Adam, go ahead and give your...
So same. It's Ace Baseball Development on Instagram, and then Twitter it's Ace Baseball Dev, DEV. Slide on in and let's
talk shop.
We'll get you into Tony. Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, guys. Make sure that you subscribe to this podcast, subscribe to The Closing Pitch, subscribe to the Tiger interview series. If you want to see our beautiful faces, go ahead and go onto YouTube and subscribe to that channel. Closing Pitch also has its own individual YouTube channel. Make sure that you're giving us a 5-star review. That helps us a lot, helps me bring on new guests to the show. Also, I love hearing and seeing your feedback. So go ahead and send me an email, spiker@rawlingstigers.com. You can also slide into our DMs. At Rawlings Tigers, I operate that account. If you want to friend me up on Instagram or Twitter, it's just Spiker Helms. Just go ahead and type that into the search bar. Thanks, guys, and we'll catch you in the next episode.